Good to see you all. So glad you made it. So welcome to the first online Pick My Brain that we have done. We have done 15. This is the 15th one of these that we've done so far, but we've not done anything live. So for those of you that are watching through the live stream on Facebook, the class is actually happening on a Zoom meeting. And you can get access to those through my website or on the mailing list. But they are simultaneously streamed to Facebook. You just can't interact through the Facebook Live app. So I want to take a minute and explain who I am. There are probably some of you in here who don't know me. My name is Julie North. I'm a medium and medical intuitive based in Ohio. And I give workshops and I do personal sessions. Basically, what I'm doing in sessions is very similar to what we do in a Pick My Brain. In a session, a person comes and I translate what their guides have to say to them. In a Pick My Brain, there is kind of a guide group that is dedicated to the particular event. So it's kind of in conjunction with everyone's personal guides, but they answer the questions for the group as a whole. So it's helpful to understand a little bit about how translation works in my world, so how it works with me. So you know, I'm not interpreting the information as much as I am translating it. And the other side doesn't speak English or French or German or Spanish. If you've had a session with me, you've probably heard me talk about that. They communicate the same way that you and I would if we all talked in our heads. So as people, when we think, we don't think in sentences. We think in concepts. It's a fully fleshed out ball of information with all of the movie clips and pictures and sensory components, emotions and intention. It's all in that concept. And if we talked in our heads, we would toss these concepts back and forth. Communication would be lightning fast, and there would never be a misunderstanding ever. It would be a beautiful thing. But what we do as people is we take our concept, and if we're going to speak it or write it, we run it through the languaging part of our brain, and we put words to it based off of our own dictionary and definitions and through our own history and baggage. And the listener or the reader of those words intakes it through their dictionary and definitions and their history and baggage. And so language pretty much makes a train wreck out of clarity. Like we all have experienced that. So in a session and in a Pick My Brain, the other side doesn't use language. They don't toss sentences. They toss concepts, just like we would if we talked in our head. And so it comes into my brain whole, but I still have to take it and run it through that messy English translator to speak it to like an individual in a session. In a group, that language is determined by the dictionaries of the whole group. So for example, as I'm putting words to their concept in my head, they're watching that. And if I'm getting ready to use a word that would give you the wrong intended meaning, if you're an individual person, they'll know that because they know your dictionary. So they sort of say no to something, and I'll take it before it gets out of my mouth, and I'll take it and run it through a thesaurus in my head until I find a word they're okay with, and that's the one that you hear. In a one-on-one session, it's just one dictionary that we're dealing with. In a Pick My Brain session, it's everyone's dictionary. So sometimes it's a little bit slower to translate because you're factoring all of those different dictionaries in there. Sometimes they'll say things a couple of ways for the various people in the room. One of the things that I've noticed is that not every piece of information is really meant for everyone. Sometimes they won't answer something simply because it doesn't serve the greatest good of the mass of people that might hear it. That they might tell you in an individual session, but they might not in a group session, or the way they explain it might be different. In other cases, if most of the people can hear it and one person, it's actually against their greatest good to have that information. No matter how hard you try, you're just not going to be able to understand what it is that they're talking about. Even in the recorded version of that, I've had some people experience that. So that's basically how translation works. And in the Pick My Brain, we randomize, you know, who's asking questions. It's not the same person all the time. So I think I'm going to turn this over to Keith. And Keith is my good friend, my long-term friend, and has attended most of my workshops in person with me and is the moderator for tonight's event. He's going to be the person who is interacting with you to figure out whose question is next, and he's the person picking who that is. So Keith, you want to explain how it's going to work tonight?
Sure. Two quick things, Julie.
Yeah.
Can you explain just real quick about what a question can't contain?
Oh,
And then
yeah. Yeah.
also just a quick disclaimer about you.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
That's okay. That's what
So,
I'm here for.
yeah, that's a good point. So you can't, the questions for a Pick My Brain really need to be big picture questions. This isn't really the place for you to say, like, why does my child have autism? It is a place for you to say what causes autism and what can be done about that. So personal questions that are specific to you or your family really are reserved for personal sessions. This is a place where the information is intended to serve a greater populace, and so an individualized answer isn't really appropriate there. Plus, things can get pretty personal in individual answers, and that's not, it might get more personal than you think. So we stick to the big picture questions. If you've got a question in your list that says, why do I have this? Or why is my life this way? Or why did this happen to me? Try to reframe that question in a way that says, why do these things happen in the world? Or what's going on with that? And then it's answerable for the group. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that, I am definitely not medically trained or licensed. So do not take this information as medical advice or practicing medicine or diagnosing, treating, curing, prescribing, any of that, even though it could very easily be phrased that way if it comes up. So just make sure that anything health related, you make sure you get it checked out by whoever your doctor is. Is that everything you needed, Keith?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Awesome. Okay, awesome.
Cool. So the way that things are going to work tonight, first of all, we want to identify of the people that are here who actually has a question. So if you can go ahead and digitally raise your hand, hit the raise your hand button if you have a question that you want to ask, and that will let me know everybody who has questions ready to roll. And from that list, I'm going to be randomly selecting people that are in the chat with us. And when you're selected, I'm going to identify you by name. I realize that we may have some identical names in here. Hopefully we can get that all sorted out. And I will unmute you, and that will allow you to personally ask your question to Julie. Sometimes the guides need clarification, so she'll ask clarifying. I'm going to leave your mic unmuted through the duration of her answer to you. There's going to be maybe some follow-up at the end, and then I will go ahead and mute your mic, and we'll go on and have a next person that we're going to speak to. So does that sound good, Julie?
That sounds fabulous. That's
okay.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
So I've noticed, I do see some stuff popping up in the chat window. You cannot type your question. You have to have a microphone. That's the only way for me to interact with you in a Pick My Brain. We're not following the chat window, and we will not be answering questions in the chat window, whether it's a technical situation or something associated with class or clarification that you might want. So, if you guys are running the chat window yourself and you want to answer each other's questions, like by all means, but on my end, and on Keith's end, there's too many things to moderate to be also managing the chat window. So the raise your hand feature is under participants and should be an option when you go to the participant window. And if someone already asks your question, you can lower your hand. In the time frame that we have, so we're going to run for about an hour. We're going to run to about 7:30, and then we're going to take about a 15-minute break, and then we're going to come back and run for another hour. If we get through all of the questions, then we'll start with secondary questions. But it kind of depends on how much time we have. So we won't pick someone twice unless everybody who's raised their hand has had an opportunity to ask a question. So make sure you prioritize your questions. So other than that, I'm glad you're all here. The class is going to lock, so nobody else can get in at this point. And Keith, you can go ahead and pick your first person.
Okay, fantastic. I think I'm going to do, I see all the people with their hands raised. So I'm going to go with Catherine Jane. Catherine Jane, I'm going to unmute you. Can you hear me, Catherine?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. Okay, I'm going to hand this over to Julie.
Hi,
Julie?
Catherine. How are you doing?
I'm so excited to be doing this with you. This is super awesome. Like I said before, I feel like, you really answered my prayer. But I'll just jump right to my question. So, ever since like 2012, I feel like people have been talking a lot about like converging timelines and shifting timelines. I've been feeling a lot recently when something really big like this happens with this whole health crisis, that I feel like a major shift in the timeline. So I just wanted to know like what you felt about the timelines. Obviously, I know timelines shift all the time based on any of our actions, but then further, I was wondering like where you saw like humanity's timeline going, like maybe like in a couple probabilities. So
That's a lot
that
of
was
questions in there.
kind of wrap this all
Okay,
in one.
so what you're talking about is time, and part of the problem is that you're talking about time from a human concept, which makes it challenging to answer from a universal standpoint. So human beings perceive time in a linear fashion, and there's a lot of really good reasons for that. It's one of the ways that the soul gets a better understanding of cause and effect, as well as connectivity. So when you were asking your question around converging timelines and where the timeline is going for humanity, it implies that time moves, and time does not move. We move in time. So all things are possible. It's a very challenging concept to understand from a 3D brain model, because we kind of only see things in that framework. But technically, everything is happening all at the same time. So when you look at it from that perspective, what is it that you're wanting to know about the human timeline at the moment?
Um, kind of. Sometimes I feel like people shift timelines differently. Um,
Yes.
so sometimes I feel like, sometimes like you were talking about like in Rootwire, like with the ascension, like some people will get left behind and they'll go on a completely different timeline, and or
Yeah.
that kind
So,
of.
so are you asking about the shift itself and what's happening in that? So just want to clarify something that you said there, because it's important. There are not people getting left behind in this particular shift. So that's the reason this shift is happening this way, instead of following some patterns that it's had historically. It is that people are not intended to be left behind, which is
Yeah.
why everything's in transition rather than just like total destruction and starting over, cleaning the slate. As far as I think the question you're asking is about the reality, the personal perception of reality in time, and how that's going to work. The challenge here is, if it were as simple as we each create our own reality and timeline that is separate from everyone else's, then if we raised our vibratory rate, for example, into kind of an ascended plane perspective, then we might go into that space and other people would not. But again, that is not how this particular human plane shift is happening. So that's what makes some of this such a struggle, is that everyone needs to come. The only two options are to exit a body, die essentially, or shift with this, transmute. And that drags up a lot of lower vibratory things as that floor kind of raises, if you're looking at it from a 3D model. So, even in the same framework of vibration for the human plane, we all have different realities within that. What happens as this shift goes along is that there's a tremendous amount of people shifting. So all of these relationships that have changed, friendships that have changed, family dynamics that have changed, are part of that, because people are kind of resonating together and moving in different places. But it's such a wide and varied amount of shift in stagger here, stagger there, that it doesn't have the feeling necessarily of cohesiveness that you might have if the whole populace were elevating in exactly the same way at the same time. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I guess I'm just kind of confused in terms of like the idea of like converging timelines. Is that just not really a thing, since like I feel like everything's possible. I've just always heard people talk about like timelines converging as we get to the future.
Right. So people can talk about that all they want, but that doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily make that an actual thing.
Yeah, so it's just like you don't think it's a thing.
Well, you're talking about timelines converging as though they're separated, and remember that they're not. Everything
Okay.
is all existing at the same time. So people are kind of shifting in and out of vibrational ranges. So, parallel timelines, if that's what which is the easiest way for humans to look at it, is through parallel timelines. So you existing as yourself in umpteen different versions, having slightly different realities. As the barriers, if you will, between vibrational realities thins because the planes are shifting, you can kind of slide back and forth between the two of those, and have some. You might not notice it at all. You might notice a significant amount of duality, or it can be really confusing in general about kind of exactly which timeline your reality is in at any moment. But for the most part, your consciousness is pretty well anchored here. Timelines themselves are not merging or converging in any way that's any different than it would have in any other time frame. So, your reality, your consciousness as a whole, as the whole soul, is experiencing itself in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of time frames, essentially all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So they're already converged in that way. It's just when you're, how do we explain this? Your soul, if you will, sort of has walls. Think of it like walls between the realities. And because everything's shifting, those walls are getting thin. And so your consciousness from this reality can kind of slide over into some of these other realities that are very similar, but they're not actually converging. Okay?
Yeah, that was really thankful.
You're welcome. Sure. Thanks so much.
Okay, awesome. Let's get on to Melanie Johnson. Melanie,
Hi, Melanie.
can you hear us?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
It's nice to see you in person. I've had a session with you before.
It's nice to see you too.
So I'll get to it. It's kind of a heavy question, but it's the first thing that came to mind today. What are the different possibilities for where we go when we die, and how is this determined?
So that's a really interesting question. There are not different possibilities. There just aren't. However, there are different perceptions of those possibilities. So death, by death, we're defining death in this conversation by no longer inhabiting a body. And the body is a temporary vehicle for the soul. So the soul exists before the body, after the body, and persists. So think of it like a uniform, if you will, that helps you have a particular framework of an experience. When we initially die, most often what happens to us is what we think is going to happen to us. So it's kind of like, here's your body, and your soul is overlaid in it. So, you have this marriage, right? When the soul detaches from that, I don't mean astral projection, I don't mean stepping out over trauma, but actually detaches from the physical body, it hasn't actually crossed the vibrational plane barrier to go home, universally speaking. So it will still retain a lot of its human constructs. It's kind of, it's very much you, as you know yourself now in your human form. But if you genuinely believed that 9-foot tall angels with wings were going to come get you, then that's probably what you're going to see. If you believe that you're going to see your family and your friends, then that's probably what you're going to see. The belief pattern, it can be a beautiful thing as far as part of the crossing process goes. It can also be deeply problematic. When people don't realize that they've died, they sometimes struggle, and intervention needs to happen so that they're aware of what's happening. So their family might come get them, or their guides might come get them, or designated entities who do that as a job, will come get you. They can't make you do anything. You have sovereignty as a soul. They're pretty convincing, so it's usually not too much of an issue. But the big challenge is people who are afraid to die, particularly around religion. So the two, you can get, we call it stuck in the plane, but you're not really stuck here. There's no such thing as actually being stuck in the plane. There is a perception of being stuck in the plane. So if you die and you refuse to cross, the two reasons that I see the most of that is fear of crossing, because their religion or their belief pattern has taught them that they're going to be judged, and they are afraid they're going to be judged poorly. So they might believe that they're going to a hell. That is probably the largest reason for seeing deceased people in the plane who haven't crossed. And then people who died but felt inherently tied to a responsibility here. I have to take care of my family. I have to take care of my kids, that sort of thing. Those two, then they can stay indefinitely until they decide to cross or realize that they can cross. But the actual crossing process differs for people. There's a lot of familiarity to it, and a lot of that has to do with cultural belief patterns. If you lived, 4,000 years ago, you might have been in a culture that believed that, jaguars were going to come get you. And so when you died, that's what you would see is because the brain's job is to make sense of input information, and it does the best job with it that it can in that process. It's a kind of a confusing process in most cases, but every soul goes to the same technical place once it's crossed. If it's not crossed, then it can kind of meander around in varying places, mostly here, because that's where it's familiar with, and that's why it's here, because it's afraid to cross any boundaries. But once crossed, there is no some people go to one place and some people go to another. Does that answer your question?
Mostly. I guess I'm a little confused about what that place is and kind of how reincarnation would tie into that.
So the question about what that place is, what you're looking for is a term. And that's normal because human beings look to identify things. But I don't have a term for that. Christians would call that heaven. Different people would call that different things, but it would require a term that I don't have or can't translate to you. As far as reincarnation goes, souls, think of souls as being in a bank, I don't know. If you picked that heaven was Mars, we'll just make up an example to make this make sense. That heaven was Mars, and so all souls went to Mars or wherever this place is, this universal energetic space that is this well of souls. Souls determine for themselves when and where and how they're going to incarnate in varying timelines and realities based off of their inherent interest to grow and expand in that process. So no one sends you back. You send yourself back. It's no one can keep you from coming back. You have guides, advisory things, but in the end, the soul makes all of those choices for itself. So reincarnation, again, in the human brain, we look at it in a linear time frame. So we are going to call we have a tendency to only look at lives historically as having existed, as a past life sort of thing. And that's what we call them. And in conversation, that's the easiest way to talk about them for that language. But from a technical standpoint, you also have future lives and concurrent lives. You literally can pass yourself in the street as a different human being. It doesn't happen a whole lot unless you look at everything as being, there's a number of ways you can look at that. So everything technically is part of a whole, like all souls are cells in the liver, in which case every single person that you pass in the street is you. So it depends on how your language is a defining thing, and how you use that language determines how you would define reincarnation. But it's soul choice. We have a tendency to come back with people that we're familiar with in one frame or the other. So there's some familiarity to that, but in most cases, but not all. That answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Awesome. You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
Thanks, Melanie. Okay, just a quick reminder to everybody, if you want to ask a question, make sure that you're identifying yourself by raising your hand, and that will let me know to pick from you from our list. And our next person up is going to be Carol Blaine.
Hi, Carol.
Can you hear me all right?
I can. It's great to see you, Julie.
How you doing? Good to see you
Good.
too.
Doing great. So here's my question.
Okay.
We've heard for several years now about the shift and how many of the souls here incarnated now to experience that shift. How is the current COVID-19 pandemic part of or connected to the shift?
That is a huge question. I love it. So I want to clarify, or they want to clarify really something that in your question. You said that a lot of the souls came here to experience the shift. Yes, that's true. Most of the souls on the planet came at this time to facilitate that shift.
Oh.
So to be a part of that facilitating. So souls, pretty much, I can't say all because it's too encompassing and they won't let me, but just about every soul that was on the planet or in this particular human plane, the last time that it shifted. Well, what it did when that one was it split. It is actually on the planet now, in addition to a lot of other souls that have been working through varying processes. So what was the last piece that you were asking about there?
So how, if at all, is the current COVID-19 connected to the
right.
shift?
So everything. Okay, so this is going to require kind of a big answer in order for any of the pieces to make sense. It's important to understand what the shift is actually, and essentially it's evolution at work. So in your science growing up, you were taught that evolution is something that takes thousands or millions of years, and that's not actually true. It might be true in some cases, but it's not true in all cases, and the human soul evolution doesn't work that way. So souls are coming to have human experiences with the purpose of expanding through experience. And I'm going to need to use my whiteboard. So let's go over here for a second and look at this. So let me see here. So you have to understand that everything let me turn this up just a little bit. There you go. So everything is vibration in the universe. So we were talking about bandwidths, for example. So let's just make a couple of these bandwidths so you can see what we're dealing with. And this helps explain this. And so let's say, let me see if you can see that. Keith, can you see that?
I can see that pretty good.
Okay.
Just make sure you make things big.
Yep. So if these are bandwidths, and let's give them, we're going to make up numbers for them, right? These are not real numbers. Let's say this is 200 megahertz, this is 300 megahertz, this is 400 megahertz, and 500, right? So the human experience is limited to a particular bandwidth. So I don't know if you all can see separate colors, but let's make this 400 to 500 range right here. That didn't come out very well, did it? We'll call this one the human plane, right? So in this range, right through here, every human experience that you can have in the body, and that's a defining factor, in the body. So you can leave the body, meditate, astral travel, whatever it is that you're doing, and have experiences of love, for example, that you can't actually feel in the physical system. So every human experience falls into this range in our example of 300 to 400 megahertz. So let's take the line of love. If it runs through here, this is the line of love. Love is a defined word, defined by individual people differently. But on a plane level, this is the greatest point of love that anybody could ever experience in their body, that dot right there on this line. And this is the lowest vibrational range of that. So as a human being, you come in with access to the entire range, but you may only technically be running the majority of the time a portion of that, you know, this portion of the range there. Let me see if I can get this actually closer for you so you can see that. If you, from a linear standpoint, so it's easier to talk about from a linear standpoint, linear time standpoint. If you come in and do lives over and over and over and over and over again, eventually you've covered all of this ground a bunch of different ways. We don't just do it once, we usually do it a lot of ways. So think of this as though this is your school. This is your K through 12. And eventually someone in class, in school, needs college. And that's what the shift is. And if you don't understand this, then the answer to COVID stuff won't make sense to you. So somebody in the millions or billions of people needs college. They need to have human experiences greater than this upper range, but the plane doesn't allow for that. One person is not enough to build a college for. You have to have enough souls that need and facilitate this change, which is what happened. In the fall of '93, critical mass, for lack of a better term, was reached. And it's not like the universe and all the souls didn't know it was coming. So it's been prepping for that. But the plane actually started dissolving this boundary right here. Most people would not have noticed much of that. But let's say the new plane now is going to run up here to 440, and the new floor of the new human experience is going to be here. So we're going to call that 340. I know you love my little stick people, don't you? Mm-hmm. So this is what's happening. And the functions, so for example, the operating system of human beings for this plane range right here is a 7 chakra system. For this plane right here, it's a different operating system. It requires an 8 chakra system, which is why almost everybody that's been born since, like, I don't know, September or so in '93 has an 8 chakra system, and they have it's a totally different resonance-based system. So the whole plane has to change. But we've been running in this, right, for thousands of years. And let me turn this back because I probably don't need it now. In order to facilitate that change without wiping the entire place clean and starting over, flood, fire, meteor, and all of those things have happened historically as part of human evolution change. This one is meant to be a transition. Nobody gets left behind. It's important to do this in a way that is more inclusive. The vibratory range that we're moving into deals more with that kind of inclusion, that level of comprehension, of compassion and connectedness. So it's also damaging at this point, given the other shift experiences, to do this one differently. So it's important from a karmic standpoint to not be leaving people behind. That means that all the people that are coming with this new 8 chakra system really are built in one way or another. They've got different functions, but in one way or another to facilitate this change. Your government structures, your educational structures, your family structures, your community structures, all of these frameworks that have been building and establishing themselves for thousands of years here off of a rule-based system, which is the 7 chakra system, a rule-based or plan-based system, don't work for a resonance-based system. And they don't actually allow for that higher vibratory range. It doesn't work. It's like trying to run Windows on a Mac computer. It doesn't work. So various things have come along to facilitate this change. It's not like '93 happened and all of a sudden the universe was like, oh, now we have things to do. Things have been happening to facilitate that change once it came. And the internet, for example, is a perfect example of something that the technical revolution, the industrial revolution and the technical revolution is all part of creating that connectiveness. Unfortunately, human beings are not evolved to a place where they are well motivated from spaces of contentment. And they often, and part of that is coming from the programs that they have been taught from a 7-chakra reality. And there's nothing wrong with that, it just doesn't work. So human beings having a tendency to be predominantly motivated through places of distress and cornering tend to create for themselves and from a collective, and the universe works with that, things that are distressing to create change. That could be all kinds of things. Could be war, could be pandemic, could be a meteor that hits the planet. In this case, it's a pandemic. And there's a lot of reasons for it being a pandemic instead of a war. A war would have people focusing outward. Mm-hmm. And this pandemic is an opportunity. So it's not necessarily that the virus was created for the shift. Remember that the universe is opportunistic. It's opportunistic in your own life and your own path. It is also opportunistic as a collective. And so it is an excellent collective opportunity to create a space of like forcible shift. Basically, the world is cornered at home. And if it were a war, everyone would band together, right? And be all like, hey, we're on the same team, and just like World War II did. But you're not focused inward. And this is an actual energetic and functional human being change. So you need people to focus inward. You need people to really see what they have created in their individual life, because the world is made up of individual lives. You are co-creating this world that you live in. So if all you focus on is what people are creating for their lives in Ethiopia and that they're not eating, that's a beautiful thing. We want to feed them and help them, and help them in whatever way we can. But at home, here in this body, I'm not operating from a place of resonance. I'm not in a relationship that's resonant. I'm not in a location that's resonant. I'm working a job that's not resonant. I'm not being truthful resonantly with the self. I'm operating from the should structure, from the rule-based structure, from the do this and then you'll be supported and then you'll be loved and then you'll be worthy and valuable, like all of those things, which doesn't work when you're moving into a resonance-based system. So those programs don't work. And one of the ways to get the collective to start looking at the choices that they have made, whether it's how well they take care of their health, or who they choose to spend the rest of their life with, that they're now spending a lot of time in a small space with, how we interact with each other, these very personal identity things are being served through COVID. And the process, according to them, is that it needs to be intense enough to facilitate change, because y'all are stubborn, and programmed. There's a lot of reasons for that, and it's not a judgment statement, but it is a challenging change to make, particularly when you're coming from a world that's basically told you that you don't have any choices. They tell you have choices, but functionally you learn that you really don't have choices, into a place where you actually have all the choices, but the framework isn't set for that. So it's a very scary change to make, and isn't made very willingly by most people. So it corners them into these realities. We cannot make anyone make any changes. We cannot make anyone have any epiphanies of awareness. We can't make people look at themselves. We cannot make them assess where they are through free will choice in their life. But we can create an opportunity for that. And hopefully this opportunity is intense enough and long enough for people to get what they need out of it, because the universe is always conspiring in your individual behalf, but also on the behalf of the whole. So if through this process, not enough change happens to the structures, both individually within us and how we function, but also that kind of bleeding out into the world and how our primary community structures function, then there will be other opportunities that will probably be more challenging. It's the nature of how that works, but change has to happen. It's going to happen. So, how you ride that is entirely up to you. If everyone stays home and, and ignores themselves and their choices and doesn't make any growth for themselves, if that's what happens with the majority, there will be other opportunities to get it. So, did that answer your question?
Yes, my heart's racing. Everything is on fire. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Good question. Thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Carol. Okay.
You erase that for me.
I am going to call
Just leave it.
Robin McCulloch. Robin, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Robin.
Hi, Julie.
How are you?
Great.
Good. Good to see you here.
Yeah. So thank you, Keith, because this question follows on. One of the, I'm cautious about using the word conspiracy theories that I've heard about the novel coronavirus has to do with 5G and how there's a lot of historical points in time when different things have been introduced. And so I'm curious if the coronavirus is related to 5G and that helps amp up the shift, or if that's even anything important for us to know. But given that there's not a cure for COVID-19, that linkage is pretty fascinating.
Yes. So that's a good question. There are a tremendous amount of pieces of information floating around about that. So the other side says that 5G is particularly challenging in the physical system as it is. Remember that the physical system isn't really well adapted to the new vibratory plane. 5G has some real value once the shift is like through. And it has value through that process, but everything in the universe is a vibration, everything. And every time there is a significant vibratory impact on us, so we're human beings, we're not talking about what's happening in other planes, we're talking about what's happening in this one. So all of the beings that are affected by that vibratory are being affected, period, by that vibratory plane or vibration. So sometimes those effects are nominal and sometimes they're not. 5G is having a pretty significant vibratory impact on the human physical system, in the same way that intense tuning bowls might have. Time, exponential times exponential. Thank you. So is it the cause of COVID? It is definitely not. Would COVID be this bad if 5G weren't here? Yes, it would. But there is a coalescing of these things. They are helping facilitate one another. So it's not that the guides don't particularly love 5G. The reason they don't love it is because the physical system is taking kind of a beating with it at the moment. But that's not a permanent problem to have. And I will tell you the biggest challenge for human beings, because 5G is not going anywhere. So it's not like the people are going to band together and get rid of this at this point, in probably not in your lifetime. Maybe in your lifetime, but it has an impact. That impact causes your cells to vibrate in ways that sometimes can be positive, sometimes can be negative. In this case, it helps create opportunistic immune system issues But it's not like you're going to see only COVID issues and deaths where there's 5G. There are other vibratory factors that play too. So they're cooperative, and even though the shift itself is something that's on deck, the other side doesn't consider it good or bad. It just is. Like, this is what has to happen, or what is happening, and needs facilitated. In the larger arc of human evolution, humans will come to recognize far better the effect of vibratory environmentals on their system, and choose things accordingly, adjust things accordingly. But this is part of that process, so they wouldn't have it go away, and it's not the cause of the virus. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome. Good question.
Thanks, Robin. Next up, we're going to do Hannah Morris. Hannah, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Yeah.
Hi, Hannah. How are you
Cool.
doing?
Hi, I'm great.
Good.
What my question kind of piggybacks off of a question earlier. This week I put down my cat of 14 years, and I was curious about like reincarnation of cats and pets, because it makes me think about the movie. Have you seen Coco, where they jump from plane to plane? Like, they're kind of half dead, half alive. I wasn't sure if they reincarnate the same way that human souls do.
So, okay, that's a good question. First, let me tell you, I'm sorry, personally, sorry to hear about your cat. That's sad.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sad. So from a universal standpoint, what are animals doing? So there are two types of animals in the world. I mean, there's lots of types of animals, but basically animals are going to fall into two categories in the human plane. They're going to fall into your average animal category, and then they're going to fall into service animal category. The vast majority of people prefer to think of their pets as service animals, but there's a very specific definition for service animals, and I don't mean trained service, like licensed. I mean like actual service animals. So what happens to animals when they die is going to be different depending upon which category that they fall into there. So regular animals are having an experience of expansion. They do have a soul. They have a consciousness. It's not going to fall into the same category or range, maybe, that human souls might have. But it is possible for a human soul to come back and, be a dog. It's not very common, but more often than not, so like around those sorts of things, people who are perceiving reincarnation from human to animal standpoint are actually seeing a soul or a guide take on an animalistic temporary form as a means of creating particular function. So that's slightly different. Animals that are just animals are going to go to a plane just like humans would. It's just not the human plane that helps them process their particular experience of growth. And they're going to have that same kind of reincarnated kind of experience, just at a different level. Service-based animals are probably the best way to define that is more conscious. So they have an agenda that is very directly related to the serving of the human plane. Most of the time, that's going to be serving a particular type of human or a very specific human being. It's not always that, but the vast majority of it is that. And so those animals, if you were trying to break it out into the planes, the vibrational planes like we were talking about earlier, you would consider those animals as being on a higher evolutionary plane than your average bunny hopping through the backyard. But that doesn't make them better. We have a tendency in a human standpoint to look at things that are in a different place evolutionary as better than or worse than, and doesn't really work that way. That hierarchy mindset in human beings is necessary for part of their experience, but it doesn't actually make it accurate on a universal level. So animals can come back. Service-based animals in particular will often come back as another animal, and sometimes will come back and find their way to you. So service animals typically pick their people. They'll either pick the individual, and they can do it repetitively, or they'll pick a type of person, a type of thing that they come to be in service to, or an energy to deal with and help with. So, but they're going to go through a very similar process to human beings in that they have a crossing experience. It may not be a human type crossing experience, but they do have a crossing experience. And then they have an assessment or, you know, like a debriefing of their experience the same way that people do. The religions in the human plane have sort of turned that into a judgment thing, but it's not actually that. It's always a personal assessment, an assisted assessment of, you know, did you do the experiences that you went to do? What did you grow from those things? Bigger picture perspectives, but not necessarily judgment. So the animal that you are talking about is a service animal. So it would have gone into that same kind of process that we were talking about, where, you know, it's assessing, it's process. Does that make sense?
Yes. How long does that take approximately?
You're asking a linear time
Oh,
question.
I guess that is the time thing. Okay, that makes sense.
So I will tell you that, you know, it's true. The same is true with animals as with people, and there's no linear time. With people, I've seen people get through kind of a debriefing process in a couple of weeks. I won't see clients around their deceased person if they've died within 2 months, because it's very rare for me to be able to get access to them because they're busy, so to speak. Even though they have the capacity to multitask, time and space are different. We just kind of don't get them. Service animals are the same way. So it can be years, because again, you're not dealing with a linear time function. And this is going to be, I don't know why they want to explain this to you. Okay. So we're experiencing time in a kind of a linear type of fashion. And so, you know, if we're traveling along through time and our animal, you know, dies back here, we perceive that and if they don't reincarnate, you know, like let's say if they were measuring linear time, it might take them 40 years, you know, to get through them. Then how are they going to come back into our life? But a deceased person, a deceased animal, anything that's been functioning in this plane, that exits the plane from a birth and death standpoint anyway, can reinsert itself at any given point. So, you know, if it took your beloved grandmother or your beloved cat 40 years, if you were trying to measure it in linear time, 40 years to go through their, you know, assessment process, they could reinsert them. When they're done with that, they could just reinsert themselves back into your experience 2 weeks after they died. It's a really difficult thing to comprehend because we're working within a framework that the brain is perceiving time in a linear fashion, as though time is moving. But really, time is stationary and we move in it. So when you're not working within those confinements, you can do whatever you want. Do you understand?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Sure.
Thanks, Hannah. Julie, we're at 7:24. Do you want to take one more question before the break?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. I'm sure your last name is not iPhone, but Sherry's iPhone. Sherry, can you hear me?
I can.
Fantastic.
Hi, Sherry. How are you doing?
Really well, thank you.
Good. Thanks for joining.
My pleasure. My question is, if other people do readings in this group, I feel like I'm connecting to the past person, but are my guides helping me do that? I don't know if other people have the same.
So your question is based around you in particular, rather than being a big picture question.
Well, I'm just if other people do the same thing.
So frame it that way. What is it that you want to know exactly?
Who are we really connecting with? Is it the person's guides talking, or is it the person?
That's going to depend on the reader. So there is no two identical, so there's so many different components to intuition. Intuition being defined as sensory components and input beyond the crude basic 5 senses that come with your body that they taught you about in school, and they didn't even teach you all of them. So when you're talking about intuition, you could have 1,000 people in a room. Every one of those will be intuitive, and they will all be intuitive differently. They might have, let's say of those, there's 1,000 people, and there's also 1,000 pieces of intuition, varying levels of empathy, varying levels of perception, varying levels of mediumship. In mediumship, so mediums are all psychics. Not all psychics are mediums. In the psychic end of things, it's very sensory perception oriented. So they will be tending to pull things out of people's fields, and some of them might be really good at checking on physical, medical things. Some of them might be really good on picking up emotional components, or maybe current emotional components, and another one's good at picking up historical emotional components or karmic baggage. So there's all of these factors that go into that. In mediumship, there is the ability to communicate with non-embodied entities, which is very different than just picking up something in the energy, whether it's karmic energy, emotional energy, static energy through the system. So again, all of these varying factors. And then if you're talking to entities, depending upon what medium you are, who you are, what kind of access you have. Are you only capable of communicating with deceased people? Are you only capable of communicating with deceased people and people in these particular vibratory ranges? Or do you have a broad spectrum of that? Or and that's all the technical end of that. So who I don't like my words. The information is the information. So let's say, let's make an example out of you and I. It is a made-up example, okay? So let's say you and I both say that we are mediums, and we both do readings. And let's say that we both are actually technically talking to someone's guides. That's the technical end of it. I might be saying to people, I am translating what your guides are communicating to me. You, on the other hand, might be telling people that you're talking to the angels. So there's these technical pieces that are actually happening, and then there's the human being's perception of what is happening and what they're getting. And some of their perceptions can actually diminish the quality of the information or the full spectrum of that information. So you could be communicating with someone's, you could be communicating with, like, I don't know. The other side doesn't like hierarchy examples, so they don't like any of my examples. I don't know how to make an example out of it. It's not a hierarchy. You could be talking to the guides. Let's just make up something. They don't like it, but that's the best example I can give you. But you might think that you're just talking to your person's guides. So the perception of that kind of hampers that in some way. Or you might be perceiving that you're talking to angels. And if you have a belief pattern, well, the vast majority of people that are going to say that they're talking to angels are not actually accurate. The angelic realm is a very specific realm of entities. There are a boatload of them, just like there are a boatload of other entities. But the human plane has, through the vehicle of religion, really adopted sort of an angelic overarching umbrella that all good entities are angelic and everyone's guides are angels. It's fine for people to think that. The other side doesn't really care. It just isn't technically accurate. So there's this difference between what's actually happening with readings and what the person thinks is happening and how their perception may influence that. So if they believe that they're talking to angels, and maybe they're right, maybe they are talking to people in the angelic realm. So let's just say that they're right. But if they have a belief pattern that says that angels are kind and loving and compassionate, then they're going to unfortunately be in the way of their translation and their information, because it will be very challenging for their brain, for their being, to translate any information that would come across as like, hey, you're fucking this up, you know, because it doesn't sound very compassionate. So our own patterns of thinking, our belief patterns create constraints. And if you allow that, then it can affect what you're perceiving you're talking to and the information that you get around that. There is no one way to say, though, that like all mediums are talking to the same entities, because they're not, you know. You and I might talk to the exact same entities. You and I, let's say in our example's sake, you and I are both readers, and we both read for the same person. We are both going to, and we both talk to people's guides. So we're both going to be talking to those people's guides. That might be the fact of it. What parts of that we're good at translating, or how we translate, will affect that. And if you're dealing with a reader who is interpreting information rather than translating information, that's really going to affect it. Unfortunately so, because interpretation is an insertion of your perspective of that information, whether it be emotional perspective or conceptual. So really, interpretation is a dangerous technical process. There are certainly people out there who that's the experience they need to have, is that they need to interpret information. And there are people that need to hear interpreted information. Right or wrong isn't particularly relevant. It's right if that's what your soul needs it to be. But there's no singular way to answer that question. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Thank
awesome.
you so
Good
much.
question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that, so that's a good question.
Woohoo.
Awesome. Thanks, Sherry.
So, actually, that takes us to our break time, doesn't it?
It does.
Wow.
It does.
Okay.
So it's 7:33 now. We're going to take a 15-minute break, right?
Yes.
So we will be back at 7:48.
Okay. I did want to make a note here. I did get a message passed to me that the Facebook live stream, it did not take for some reason. So this will go up later when it's edited. It will go up to Facebook and to YouTube, in case you guys on the break are texting with your friends and they're saying, I can't watch or something like that. So.
Okay, awesome. So everybody have a bathroom break and get something to drink and eat, and we will see you guys in 15 minutes, okay?
Awesome.
All right, thanks, Julie.
Thanks, guys. See you after the break. Yep, thanks everybody for tuning back in there.
Okay. I'm actually going to start with someone who they don't have their video turned on. Michelle M. Can you hear us, Michelle?
I can.
Fantastic. Michelle?
Hi, Michelle. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks.
Good. What do you want to know?
I'm kind of, I guess, piggybacking off of earlier you talked about this human vibration and the bar being raised, and it being raised because of a critical mass having been achieved. And so with the current situation, with everybody being at home and hopefully reflecting on their individual selves, I'm a little curious as to like what the critical mass would look like for this progression to happen, so that there's maybe no need for a future opportunity for the universe to have us reflect on this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What does that critical mass look like, and what what's the word? Because I guess what I'm seeing is, like, there's definitely collective fear. I'm seeing collective, whether you're afraid of the virus, or you're afraid of your government, or you're afraid of mass hysteria, you're afraid for the economy. There's
Correct.
definitely a fear theme here. And
Yep.
I imagine if the human vibration is going up a notch with love, then fear also has to be going up a notch. And is there something happening, like, is this part of the process, is like processing that fear?
Yes. So, yeah. And in the diagram that we used earlier, we were just talking about the singular line of love, but there's all kinds of emotional, experiential perspectives that will run through all the planes. So that's just one of them. So fear is the result of not feeling in control. And the 7 chakra system, the plane structure system, it's complicated. As a human being, you have inherent survival wiring. It is necessary to have survival wiring. At a very genetic standpoint, it's a core fundamental. And at our earlier, less evolved incarnate states, it was very much used to literally, tangibly keep you safe. But as human beings have evolved, and in a rule-based system in which things became out of balance, a plan-based system became a rule-based system through the efforts of control of some. And the cultural teachings became distorted in a way that generates the illusion of free will choice, which is inherent to the human perspective. You come get in a human body by free will choice. No one makes you come. You leave the human body by free will choice. Maybe not your conscious choice, which is a fragment of your soul, a piece, but the soul's choosing. In between that birthing and exiting place, the culture teaches that, you can do whatever you want. You can be whatever you want. You can partner with whomever you want. You can live wherever you want. But functionally, like, that's the language that we teach. But functionally, the culture teaches you that it isn't actually true. It's technically true, but not attainable. And that free will choice has you judged, has you shamed. So the survival wiring in the system has people functioning on, like, operational fundamentals that are obligatory, rather than actually exercising the concept of what is resonant for me. The new system is a resonance-based system, not a what should I do. So language such as should, shouldn't, supposed to, the right thing, or any concept, no matter what language you use, that plays into this idea of should, is something that has to go. It's not that the behaviors that we're doing are necessarily bad. It's the reason we're doing them that is the issue. So let's make an example out of that so that it makes sense. Let's take the current pandemic situation, and let's say that everybody had a bunch of N95 masks at home and hoarded, and they turn them over to the healthcare professionals because that's what they should do, because that's what a good Christian person would do, or because they're going to be judged if they don't, if any of their friends or family find out that they have a bunch of masks. That's what a bad person would do. So I want to, I want to be a good person. I want to be seen as a good person. Any of these things, this is what I should do. The action is fine. The reason is the problem. The evolved critical mass reason, if we were past that point, would be that if people had erroneously made decisions like hoarding all of the N95 masks, they would still give them over to the people that needed them the most, but they would do so because it felt actually resonant for them to do. Now, in our example, a lot of the people who were doing it because they should, if their system, if they stopped and asked their system, their actual physical system, is this resonant for me to do? Most of them would probably get a yes. The problem is that when you are operating from a should fundamental set of rules, this is what a good person does, this is what a good human does, and you're doing something, when the brain engages in should, that's the rule. Once it engages in the rule, it generally does not traverse beyond that thought process. It has the should, then it has the action. And in the end, the action is fine. But this is not a plane. We're moving into a plane that it is imperative that you be self-aware. You are, in our metaphor, a cell in the liver. It's important in the evolution of human beings that you learn to be kind of one with your resonance. Resonance is not about what I want. I may want chocolate right now, but it is not resonant for me. So I can say I want chocolate, but is it resonant for me at this time? And it's very, very important to be functioning from the at this time piece, because resonance changes all the time. The universe is perpetually changing. So chocolate, if I said, is chocolate resonant for me at this time, even though I want it really bad, I might get a no. But I'd probably ask again in an hour. Is it resonant for me now? Or maybe I'll ask tomorrow. Or maybe it's something not as simple as chocolate. Maybe it's, there's a great job offered to me in Seattle. You know, I really want it. I've been seeking this job. It's mapped out. It looks like everything that I've ever wanted. The inclination would be to take it, right? Like, this is what I've been working for. Take it. But if you don't stop and say, okay, I really want it. It looks like everything, but is it resonant for me to take that job at this time? Your body's going to respond very simply. The yes feels one way, no feels another. And if you're not checking in with what's resonant as something different from what I should do or what I want to do, then your action is not coming from the more evolved space. Now, what's resonant is not meant to be the new rule, right? So if I want chocolate and I hear that it's not resonant for me, when I check with my system, it says it's not resonant, I still am operating from free will choice, and I'm going to eat that chocolate, right? I have the free will to do that. It's not about the action as much as it is the why behind the action. So to evolve human beings through the current pandemic to the place that they are intending to evolve to requires enough people to be recognizing that they are where they are because of the choices they have made. Now, and those choices, they could look at it and say, well, this is what my parents told me to do. They told me to go to this college. They told me to, you know, marry this girl or this guy, or, you know, this is where I should live. This is what my degree was in, so this is what I should do. Any of these shoulds or concepts thereof. And look, it's easy to blame. That's what victimization does. When you perceive that you are not the creator of your reality, you essentially are operating in a state of victimization. And you cannot control everything that happens around you, but you can control you in the situation, and you can control how you feel, and you can control how you navigate that process. So the evolvement that needs to happen through this extended, hey, I'm with me, myself, and I, is this self-awareness that can say, this is what I think, this is what I believe, this is what I feel, right? And I'm here because because of these choices, not because someone made me. So what do I think, and what do I believe, and what do I feel? And the human experience is an experience of action, right? The thought processes, the belief patterns, the emotions, those are all very energetic, and they can exist, do exist as part of the soul without the physical system. The physical system is the system of action in this plane. So what actions am I taking? And am I taking those actions because I should or because I am resonant? When you stop at when you operate from should, you often don't go, well, actually, do I want to? Do I want to? And then is it resonant for me? We just do it because we should. So the process is look at where I am, look at who I'm connecting with, what I'm related to, what have I created? Do I like this job? Do I like this partner? Do I like these kids? Do I like this house? You know, whatever these things are in anyone's life, do I like my religion? You know, or do I like parts of it? It's not usually a big blanket thing. It's the details of it and the details of the self. What's not resonant about that? So it's a matter of fine tuning, but it has to start with broader spectrum things. And it's a process of learning how to discern the difference between should and want and resonant, both from a big picture, do I want this job? And if the answer is no, and the job's not resonant for me, why not? What would make this resonant? What would make me want it? What would make it resonant? Right? And going through those processes, which is a skill set that human beings overall have not learned. The culture did not teach that. So, you know, it's a cornering process that's happening in the evolution of human beings without a good teacher, you know, to it. There's no, it's not that there's no models. There's not very many models of this functionality from a human standpoint. And you don't have to get all the way through that, but there has to be enough people transitioning into that. The very first steps of that are looking around and going, do I even want this? Do I even like this? Right? And if not, why? And then what's resonant? So it's important to acknowledge the choices we've made and that we have put ourselves wherever we are. And we have the power to do that, and we have the power to change that. It may not be a snap of our fingers, but we have the power to make different decisions and choices. And how are we going to make those choices? Are we going to make the next choices something we should do or something that's resonant, right? So it might be resonant to do nothing. Right now it's resonant to do nothing. I want to get out of this, but it's resonant to do nothing at this time. If you don't say at this time when you're checking in with resonance, you're not going to get clear information. You're not going to get a clear answer out of your system because, again, nothing stays perpetually resonant by design inherently. You know, as things change and evolve, that answer might evolve. Now, you could get up every day and say, is this relationship resonant for me today for the next 30, 40 years? And every day the answer is yes. And then you can look back on it and say, that was a long-term relationship. It was resonant long-term. But there's no way to say that something is going to be resonant with you moving forward long-term. You know, there's very few things you could say about that. To speak truthfully about the future, about one of the few, in a linear time construct, one of the few truthful things you could ever say is that it's open to change. Anything beyond that, it's all potential and it's all possible. But you can't say, you know, I'm always going to be this way. You might want to always be this way. I'm always going to be open and loving and caring and compassionate, and you know, you might want to always be that, but you probably are not always going to be that. And so you have to, you know, learn to discern these differences. But the starting place is, where am I? Accepting responsibility for where I am, not from a victim standpoint, but from an empowered standpoint, and start assessing, even in the details, what is it do I actually want, and what can I do about this in me, and what actions can I take outside of me? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Good question.
I really appreciate the victim part and the blame part too, because that's the other theme that I keep coming up against.
Yeah. Well, it's rampant, you know, because the culture teaches this, and it's not just the American culture; it is a human culture. You know, and even you can't say it's a Christian culture. the Christian culture has some of that in it, but so does every other religious culture, for the most part, has some form of, what do they call that in religion? When you have to follow these rules, here's the pathway to be a good human being. And in this culture, you have to understand how the human brain is wired. It is like a computer. So this is the thing that each of you is tasked with untangling, is your brain equations. Because when you define the world as good and bad and variances thereof, like the whole should concept, you can't ask the other side, what should I do? They can't even answer that. Should is a concept. Regardless of what term you use, the concept of it does not actually translate to the other side, because in the human plane, the concept, the word should and all of its vernacular implies that there's one and only one right way to do something, and everything else is some variant of wrong. It might be less wrong, but still wrong. And that isn't universally accurate. So you have to start saying, like, well, how do these all play out differently, and what's resonant for me, and start picking those pieces apart. When you have a planet full of people, particularly now, think about how many people have been born on the planet since the fall of 1993, and that would be if 8 chakra people only started being born in 93, which isn't true. Right? Because they were being born before then, some of them way before then, just less, and as you got closer to 93, there was more of them. But all of these people born into this plane with a system that's built to run from a place of resonance into an entire world that doesn't care about your resonance, what's resonant for you. It's built on, okay, well, yeah, you have free will choices, but here's how you do it. You go to school for 12 years, and then you go to college for 4 years. And at this point now, you have to go to college for another 2 and get your master's, or maybe another 4, get your PhD. You get a degree, and that degree has, a framework within which you work, and you get a job in that field, and you work that field until you retire, and then, you play golf, or
you do what's resonant.
Yeah, that's the rule. That's the plan-based system that we taught. And for a really long time, that worked for people. That generated survival, and it created a great framework for learning the things that human evolution system needed. But it is not like everybody's checkmarked enough of those boxes. So this next phase requires a different operating system to run. Your computers all need to get upgraded once in a while to run the new programs, right? Your phone, your tablet, your iPad, they always come out with new versions to run newer, better, cooler, more functional systems. It is the same in the human system. It's just you're not getting a new model every 2 years. So, this is what human beings are tasked with dealing with right now, is transitioning from a rule-based system. And breaking those rules is scary stuff. It breaks your relationships, or can. It breaks your financial structure. It can trigger genuine fear from a sense of safety. If I don't do these things, I'm a bad person. If I leave my partner, I'm bad. I'm either bad because everybody's mad at me, or I'm bad because my religion said so. And whatever those, or I leave my job. And so there are people who are living completely out of resonance because they're doing what they should, what the culture told them they could do, right? And they can't move over here into resonance. And that's why all of the human plane systems are having to be dismantled, right? Your educational structure, for example, is really built only to accommodate this plan. It's not built to accommodate changes in resonance, because you can't afford it. It takes too long to get that degree, and then it costs too much money. So technically you have free will choice. You can change what you want to do with the rest of your life at any point that you want. But functionally, not really very applicable in most cases. So all of these things have to adjust and change in ways that allow for greater flexibility, which is, if you're an older person, you look at the young people and you're going to see them one of 2 ways. You're going to see them as They don't give a shit about all the rules and how it has to be and what they should do, and they're just breaking everything and being disrespectful. Or you're going to look at them and say, these people are saving. They're going to save us all. You know, they are both breaking everything and saving us all at the same time. It's the same thing, because breaking everything is the point. Not just breaking it, but functionally creating other frameworks, you know, to work with. So, but it's not an easy task, and it doesn't happen overnight. You know, we're not going to see, like, in our lifetime that all cleaned up, and, you know, nobody's waving a magic wand and it's going to be beautiful. Pieces. It comes in pieces. Evolution.
Awesome. Thank you
Cool.
so much.
Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, up next, August Coyote.
Yay!
Hey. Oh,
Hi,
hi.
August. How you doing?
Hi, so good to see you in person.
You too. Looks like you got a little party going on over there.
Yeah, I got my mom in the house, our little COVID pod.
That's awesome. Good, good.
On entertainment night. Well, somebody kind of already asked my first question, so I'm going to go with, see if I can form it in a question. So,
Okay.
You know, I follow some of the conspiracy theories. Just, you know, I'm interested in the conversation. And along with the 5G, I've kind of gone a little bit down the tunnel of the, you know, the new world order, the digital currency, you know, all these unifying things that are supposed to come out of the COVID. I call it the COVID. And my intuitive sense is, so you've got the players in the world who are doing the things that seem really super controlling and you know, taking our liberties away. But I'm wondering if on a spiritual level, it's like we're shifting into more connectivity, and what it looks like on the surface is a reduction of freedom, but it's also the ego's way of like resisting transitioning into more community and less individual. Does that make any sense?
Sort of, but the other side's talking anyway, so I have to translate whatever it is they're saying. Partial, and as a result, I was only kind of partially listening to you because I was listening to them. So you said something about the connectivity of people and how you said a lot of things in there, but
sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm just trying to distill your question and also give you the things that they were saying while you were talking. So the world has become deeply interconnected through the internet predominantly, which has allowed for worldwide business and communications at, you know, at reality time speeds. There's a tremendous volume of shallow level connectedness going on the planet amongst the populace. And that connectedness is shallow because overall the people are shallow. And it's not a judgment, really. It's not we're saying that it's bad. They're dealing with the confinement of that 7 chakra system. And so this process that we're in right here, regardless of what causes that, right? It wouldn't matter whether we were having a pandemic that were causing this intentional opportunity for introspection and greater depth of the self and freedom of the self, or if something else came along and we're creating that. When you have greater authentic connection to the self, the evolution then is that the depth at which you can connect with others, or the depth with which you can connect to your work, or the depth with which you can connect to another culture or business or experience is then leveled up by that level of depth. So the framework on the plane was to create all of this capacity for connection. That had to be there first, or there had to be a level of perceptual connection happening, and the framework's already existing for that. so that when introspection came, one, it hit hard because everything you've grown used to is now taken away from you. But two, when you emerge out of this, those social media opportunities, FaceTiming opportunities, business opportunities that all already exist can be utilized with your new depth. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So, the piece that I don't have an answer for you around because you didn't frame it in a question, and maybe if you framed it as part of this, I don't want you to ask a separate question, but if there is a piece of this that you were talking about, the conspiracy theory, New World Order, overarching, controlling people, what is it about that fits into this that you were trying to get?
The global connectivity that is coming and that COVID is modeling and making very obvious for us. My question is that in alignment with this ascension process that's happening, separate from the players who have whatever their selfish agendas are? Like it's two separate things. That's what I'm asking.
So what you're talking about is something that we were just talking about. Really, it's a sort of a facet of that in the previous answer. So if you perceive that you do not have free will choice, then you are a victim, right? So if you are making free will choices in your life that continue to support businesses, people, constructs, institutions, governments, cultural things, religious things that are not honoring your capacity to be a sovereign, resonant person, then that's what you're choosing. So, in the evolved plane that we're stepping into, again, human beings are not well motivated from places of contentment. And they're much more motivated when they have some form of adversary, whether it's a virus or a government, or whatever that might be, big pharma. The point is that you can't change the constructs that keep you controlled as long as you perceive yourself as a victim. The only way to effectively create change within the self, which then will also give you the capacity, it's a rollout. Whatever you do in here is going to roll out. So if you don't perceive yourself as being sovereign and empowered here, I don't get to pick where I live. I don't get to pick what I do for a living. I don't get to pick where I eat, who I see, then you can be an armchair jockey and world complainer the entire rest of your experience, but affect not much change. Now, different people are going to affect that change in different ways. Some people are going to put their mouth there. Some people are going to put their money there. Some people are going to put their actions there. It depends on what you do, but it is a world of actions. So your actions need to genuinely reflect the authentic resonance in you. And if enough people do that, then these structures change. It is a people economy, So your energy is the commodity. Your energy in time, your energy in effort, your energy in money, and you are choosing as a populace to verbally rage and emotionally rage and functionally comply.
Sure.
So this isn't really about, hey, let's go set the world on fire. Because the knee-jerk response to being controlled, to being a victim, is like when we feel victimized, then our solution for that on the pendulum is to control. But the intention, we feel victimized, so we want to control out here. The thing we need to control is here. This is the empowered piece, not out here. The tendency in the human being is to function from the codependency and victim control pieces that it was taught. So it doesn't want to change in here. It wants to change what's going on out here. I want to change your mind. I want to get you to stop doing this terrible thing. Instead of saying, I think I'm just not going to engage with that.
Right.
It's not resonant for me. And so, it's not as simple as just saying it, and it is not as simple, and yet it is as simple as saying something as, I'm not going to patron that store.
Right.
We have the framework has been built for you. The framework to affect change, the framework for fair trade, for example, the framework for every human being to be able to get water and eat and basic necessities is already existing.
Mm-hmm.
But you all perceive that there's nothing that you can do. And the governing structures in your mind, because the governing structures are in your mind. There is no head of any corporation sitting in your living room telling you what you have to watch. There is no CEO getting in your car and saying, oh, you can't go to the mom and pop store. You have to go to, the big box store.
Mm-hmm.
It's in your mind. This concept that you have to do these things, these shoulds, that I should have this, that I should get it here, that I shouldn't have to wait, any of these things. And so you have to fight the controller in yourself, or you have no impact in the world out there. It's meaningless, shallow. Change has got to come from within at a very, very personal level. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Pretty much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Keith?
How about I unmute myself?
Hey,
That would be great.
How about?
Bad moderator. Okay, we're going to move on. August, thanks for the question. Let's go Judy Rush.
Oh,
Judy,
great.
you're up.
Hi.
Hi, Judy.
Hi, Julie.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm
Awesome.
really hesitant to ask this question because I really don't know if I understand it, but it just keeps coming up.
Okay.
And I got called. So I'm interested in this age of Aquarius and the move towards feminism, or not towards the feminine in this whole transition. All of it.
All right. So I'm going to have to frame that in a question for you because you didn't frame it as a question.
Oh, sorry.
So that's all right. So you're asking what is essentially the role of feminism in this particular shift, correct?
It's my understanding that the age of Aquarius is more in line with the feminine rather than the masculine. So, I mean, so feminism is in there, right?
Feminine has always been in there. So, okay.
Right.
So, okay, the other side's going to pick on you for a minute here, okay?
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I am obligated to translate everything that they convey.
Well, that's great, though, because I'm confused about it. So.
Okay, they're not picking on your heart. Untangle the construct of some defined age. So people really love to frame things and give it a name and then give it a mantra, and now it needs to be that. And the problem is that the mantra is rarely all encompassing. And the more the mantra gets repeated, and the human plane is then defined by the age of Aquarius in this example, right? And the rise of the feminine, or whatever you want to call that. It's woefully shallow, and unfortunately, really misses the subtleties that are going on there. So in this particular age, from an astrological standpoint, right, there are these time markers that we use in planets and star systems that mark time. So the human beings call this one the age of Aquarius. That's fine. we wouldn't consider this particular age more feminine than masculine any more than, energies all have kind of a femininity. They all have both energies in them. So all things have both feminine and masculine. But you can be a female and carry a greater masculine energy on a regular basis. So it has nothing necessarily to do with gender. There's sort of kind of character traits. Overall, everything is balanced, right? And we might oscillate between our femininity and our masculinity at any given point, any given day, or any given lifetime, or any given age. So when you look at the human experience over many ages, there are time frames that what is on the agenda would fall neatly into a current definition of feminine energies. And there are time frames in human evolution, history, linear time, if you're looking at it that way, that would fall nicely into masculine energy ranges or definitions. That doesn't necessarily mean that that age is bringing a feminine energy, and that's the impetus for the change. The impetus for the change in the plane is the evolution. And the feminine has been, they don't like any of my terms there. You all have some tricky dictionaries. The best way to put this is, without that, they do not want to divulge deeply into the history of feminine energy and what's happened in the plane. So, at least at this point, they don't. The feminine and the masculine energies became out of balance, particularly when they became out of balance and partnered with a victim controller human experience, right? And so imbalance has been the hallmark of the ending of the current astrological age. The intention is to bring balance, not matriarchy, right? It doesn't make any sense to say we've been in a patriarchal energy and everything's been about men and men get this and men get that. And we're moving into the age of women, right? Where women are going to be in power. The reason for people emoting in that way is because they feel victimized as a feminine energy. And the way we often get out of that is to fight for equality, fight for balance. That is what this particular age has required to bring it back into balance, because it wasn't happening naturally. So women had to have a movement, right? They had to persist and fight for that. But it doesn't mean that women are, or the feminine energy is trying to become the ruler or the new top dog in the next human evolutionary age. An unbalanced culture, an unbalanced human plane will have a masculine or a feminine hierarchy. A balanced plane will see the value in both of those. And the culture values those things, those energies, not necessarily as men should do this and women should do this, or masculine energy acts like this and feminine energy acts like that, but in a valuing thing. So, the reason you hear so much about femininity is because the culture for so many centuries has suppressed feminine components. That's the topic of discussion always, is how suppressed the feminine is. And it's truthful, the feminine has been suppressed. What is not being communicated, unfortunately, is that through that suppression, right, much of that suppression is culturally trained, not inherent to the males. It's not that they are born and they grow up and say, yeah, I want to control women. It's culturally taught to them that this is who a good man is. This is what a good man does. And this is what a good man is responsible for if you're in a masculine energy, or a woman who's operating in masculine energy. And so these narrow definitions or rules of how to be have also suppressed the masculine. the masculine, and then it's unfortunate that the movement that is happening in the human plane is not accounting for that. The conversation is always around the toxic masculine and the suppressed feminine. And certainly those terms can be used in lots of ways, and there are certainly plenty of masculine behaviors that are in need of adjustment for balanced human experiences. And there are plenty of feminine energies that are in need of adjustment for balanced human experience. But the women are in fight mode to get that balance, and the men are in catch up. The men are in, oh shit, what is happening? And there is no model. There are very, very few models for what a balanced masculine looks like. So where are all of the conversations around the suppressed masculine sensitivity, or the obligatory behaviors of protect and provide that the men or the masculine energy has heaped upon that in a stereotypical way? So, you have thousands of years of masculine, or in this, we're going to use the term men for ease of conversation, but who have been taught that in order to be good, if they're a man, they have to control. And then they're exhausted with that control, but they have no model how to get out of that control. How do I stay valuable as a man and not support my family? How do I stay valuable as a man and not get this job and climb the ladder? How do I stay safe as a masculine energy in a relationship with someone who doesn't need me? Those things are very important topics of conversation and evolutionary components for human beings to be in. So yes, there is a strong feminine wave, but the wave doesn't make the ocean. So it's a balance, It's just that the whip cracker is the feminine energy at the moment, at the behest of the universe for balance. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. You're very welcome. Good question.
Thanks, Judy. Okay. Paul, you're up.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hey, Julie, how you doing?
I'm fabulous. Thanks. Good to see you.
You too. This has been really interesting tonight. So I thought of this on the break because I was over looking at my smudging materials. So trying to frame this as a question, as you've stated. I was thinking about what is like the vibratory energetic impact of like smudging, regardless of what people smudge with. I guess I'm not thinking so much about the materials, but it's like in thinking about what you were talking about earlier about, one of the questions and answers about a lot of fear out there of different kinds. So I was thinking about now, what's the vibration of like smudging at a time of great disruption and fear like this?
Okay.
Maybe there's a larger question behind my, in the back of my mind about just the energetic impact of smudging in general, but I'm trying to make it more about
Sure.
this time.
Sure. So there's two components to something along the lines of, the typical American term is smudging. Other cultures might call it moving sacred smoke. So there's depends on terms, but the act is, in this case, the act of burning something and utilizing the smoke in these cases to bring or to affect the energies of a person or a space for a desired result, a balanced result usually, or in some cultures for the clearing of what they would call negative energies or entities. So it's going to depend on a couple of things. One, there are definitively natural materials existing in your plane that they're a 3D thing, and they have an effect in the 3D. So let's pick sage, because sage is a component of moving sacred smoke for some cultures, Native American cultures, and widely adopted in first world movements. sage has an effect in the actual air, right? So there is a very tangible effect to the air. It has an ionizing property. Science has shown, your science has shown that it has a decreasing effect on bacterial loads in those spaces. The same is true for other burnable substances in your earth plane, many of which are not available anymore. But there are other things coming, that are coming along that have not been quite discovered yet. So there is these tangible pieces that one can use that will affect the actual tangible environment all by themselves. A wildfire comes along, nobody's doing anything, it burns a white sage plant, it's going to ionize the air. It's going to reduce the bacterial load in that space. The secondary piece, and this is the piece that is more important, is that back to the creative person, the empowered person. I am a creator of my world. What I think, believe, and feel creates that world. I am empowered. And so in this example, if you went out and pulled a blade of grass out of your yard or a dandelion leaf and set it on fire, and if you believed, that dandelion, smoking dandelion, was going to balance your energies, it would have an effect. Because the reality that you create, that's what you're doing, is you're creating. When you partner your creative capacity, which is vast, when you partner that with a material in the plane that is already built to do that, it's like 1 + 1 = 4, right? So, but you can have tremendous impact from something that doesn't have scientifically provable yet effective components to it. And then that's the operative words there, is scientifically proven yet. Your science is dictated by your technology and your capacity to think outside of the current framework, both of which perpetually are evolving. There's a tendency in your human plane to see things as being truthful or valid only once they are proven. Anything other than that doesn't have any value because it isn't proven. At this point in the human evolution, even the science and technology that you're using to prove things isn't being acknowledged. And there's some valid reasons for that. It's not always perfect. But the goal is to really authentically be present in that process. So whether it is the rosary, so let's take something different than what you're talking about, because it's a great analogy for explaining this. The rosary itself, beads on a Catholic rosary, effectively can be made out of clay from your garden or beads that your kid had, right? The rosary itself is a process. It's a meditation is what it really is. And that process keeps you focused on an intention. And because people who use the rosary have an intellectual knowledge of it, like they know what to do, they believe it, and they're feeling something, it's an incredibly creative process in creating, energy. Now, if you can't create things that are outside of your greatest good, but there's a lot of things that can serve our greatest good. And so doing a rosary is very much like moving sacred smoke. Both people might be really looking for a sense of balance in their energy. They might be really looking for some kind of guidance or, again, some of that's going to be limited to what's serving the greatest good. But the creative power is the primary function. So, if the culture is chewing up all of the white sage plants in the world with the new version of I've got to move sacred smoke to be balanced, and it makes me look more authentic and close. Like, you know, like if you can do these actions, so you can move sacred smoke, you can burn smudge, and it's going to balance the air for sure. But if you are not buying into that, and I don't mean Kool-Aid, drink the Kool-Aid kind of buying in. If it isn't an authentic, resonant, if it isn't resonant with you, then you're just getting the scientific end out of that, right? The same is true with, you know, taking communion. You can go up and go through the regimen. You could have been raised, you know, Catholic, and you can go through the regimen and say the things. And if you are not resonant with that function, it doesn't do anything for you. It makes no effective change in your system. But if it's resonant for you, it's really meaningful in your life, and it makes effective change. So it's the perception, and you can say whatever you want, but you cannot technically lie to you cannot actually lie to the self. You can lie verbally all day long, and you can lie to other people, but your system is persistently gauging the authenticity of those things. So you can have all the actions and say all the right words, and if it's not resonant or authentic at your core, its effect is only the tangible scientific was the poor term, but effect there. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's so interesting that this is not the first conversation tonight that's cycled back around resonance.
Well, resonance, the new 8 chakra system is a resonance-based system.
Yeah.
Not a plan-based system. Everything's on resonance. And that doesn't mean like, in the early stages of this, you're seeing a lot of people who are like, well, this is what's resonant for me, and so that's what I'm going to do. Resonance without consideration for the whole isn't resonance.
Yeah. I think there's probably maybe another time a deep dive into resonance coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, we've been talking about that here too. So probably.
Yeah. This has all been really good. And I want to thank you and Keith. Thank you for moderating. So
you're very, very welcome. Those are good questions. Everybody's had great questions tonight. So thanks, Paul.
All right.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay, this is going to be probably our last question of the evening. We're at 8:44. And
44.
I have a person, K.E. Are you on?
Yes, hello.
It's
Hi.
like bingo. You guys sound like bingo over
well,
there.
You guys don't have any video, so I can't tell if you're ready or not. So
we are ready. We're ready. I'll go ahead and say hi to.
Oh, hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
So this is Rebecca and Kirsten.
Partying on, yes. So my question has evolved over the course of the evening, and I'm very appreciative of that. Okay, so here's the situation we've got, right? If I'm hearing you right, we have people who are on an 8 chakra system, being educated and parented by people who are on a 7 chakra system.
Yay, you were paying attention.
So I'm just gonna ask a really vague, open question.
Okay.
No, I'm not gonna say the word should. What's in the best interest of both parties to do in that situation?
Okay. So we want to clarify something that you said because it's not wholly accurate.
Okay.
You said we have a bunch of 8 chakra people being parented by 7 chakra people.
Right.
Not necessarily true. Most of the parents on the planet right now are probably a mix of truly 7 chakra people who are trying to evolve. So just to be clear about this, if you were born a 7 chakra person, your system is doing one of 2 things, and it's been doing it really actively since 2006, probably kicking your butt since 2009. So look at your life, and you'll probably see those markers in there. So if you're a 7 chakra person, that 8th chakra is actually right here, right? So it's right here on the thymus, and it sat in the first layer of the energetic body. If you're a 7 chakras being the primary chakras, there's thousands of chakras, the primary chakras inside the body. So this was a chakra, like we have lots of chakras in the energetic field. This was a chakra that sat right here in front of that thymus. If you are born an 8 chakra person, it's in the body. If you're a 7 chakra person living on the planet right now, you're doing one of two things. You are either on an exit strategy, or you have been incorporating, think of it like pulling that into your physical system. The other big difference here, and this is a whole nother lecture topic, but that root-based Kundalini is where that's where the Kundalini lives in the 7 chakra system. In an 8 chakra system, it lives up here around this. Now, there's lots of people out there talking about an 8 chakra and it sits up here above the crown. There is a chakra there, and that's a valid statement, but it's not in the body. So this is the real shift here that's happening. There are definitely shifts in the energetic body to accommodate that, but in the physical human system, this is where it's at. This is where the resonance lives, right? Lots of people were born before 93 as an 8 chakra system. Almost all of those people were raised by 7 chakra people. So what you have right now is you have a huge plethora of people in parenting age who are actually 8 chakra people living horrible, miserable, non-resonant, shitty lives from an emotional, physical standpoint, because they were raised by 7 chakra people who didn't know any better, with systems surrounding them that were 7 rule-based, right? So it's a matter of, like, you know, carrying on, you know, the same pattern. The best thing you can do as a parent right now, regardless of which system that you have, because if you're a 7 chakra system, you're trying to move to an 8 chakra system. If you're an 8 chakra system, you need to break the program, because you're running, if you are born an 8 chakra system, you're probably running 2 programs right now, your Windows and your Mac. Your 8 chakra system that says, I want to do what's resonant for me. And your 7 chakra system that says, well, you got to do what you should, or what is the rule? So these 2 systems fight. The key, regardless of where you are in that process, is to remember to start with the self, right? How I parent my child is going to be directly related to how I relate to myself. I'm not going to be likely or inclined or capable, really, probably very capable, there's some exceptions to that, of teaching my children how to function in resonance while still understanding compassion for others, connection to the whole, right? If I cannot conceive of that in the self, if I cannot emulate that in myself. So, you know, the act of parenting today requires that you be effectively responsible for your children, you know, in safety ways, right? But remember that you are raising human beings to go out into the world, not mini yous. And they are supposed to be asking questions, and you're kind of supposed to not know the answer. When you assume knowledge of an answer, you start teaching the pattern of there's one and only one right answer. If Sally comes home from school and says, Billy hit me on the playground, he's always hitting me on the playground, why is Billy so mean? Mom or dad or aunt or whoever's the governing, you know, raising hand here is going to be inclined, and it's the natural function of most people, is to say, well, that wasn't very nice of Billy. He sounds like a mean little boy. He must just be mean. Or we might say things like, well, his parents just didn't teach him any better, right? We give this all-inclusive, definitive answer, and there's no choices in that. The key is to say, well, I don't know, Sally. What do you think? You know, and sometimes kids can't think, right? We haven't trained them into that thinking of concepts. So your job as a parent is to honor the why questions with as many answers as you can possibly manage without losing your mind. So when he says, why is something? Well, maybe his parents didn't teach him how to be nice. Maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe he's having something go on and he doesn't know how to express that. You know, maybe he is just mean. And what other answers? Have you ever been feeling like that? Have you ever mistreated someone? Maybe he didn't realize he was, you know, that was a bad thing to do. But parents in this culture are fairly overwhelmed with the level of inappropriate, shallow, connective, driving, culturing that they think they should do, and their capacity to devote the time and energy to answering those questions is slim. And that is what is perpetuating the problem. The inability to genuinely actively engage as a parent, taking soul lessons out of the picture, right? Just talking about this not on an individual, like everyone is, because there are different people here to experience different things from soul levels, parent-child. But overall, you know, what this is going to require, what it's been requiring, is people teaching, not just parents, but school teachers, spiritual leaders, neighborhood people, whoever it is, that all the people start teaching how to think about why that might be happening, all the possibilities for why that might be happening. The jumping to assumption isn't helpful and creates a whole chain of effect that dictates, well, if this is what's happening, then this is what you do, and this is what you do, and this is what you do. Mm-hmm. But when you start thinking, well, why could that be happening? Then you open the concept up, which also opens up concepts of choice for you, right? So as a parent, try to imagine if you were really wanting, genuinely, if you're 4, or maybe you're 7, let's do 7. You're in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and you know, you want to be friends with people at school, and this kid keeps being mean to you, and you really want, like, I don't know why he's doing that, and I really want to solve that. And you go home and you ask your parent, and they say, well, he's just a bad kid. Did that solve your problem?
Not at all.
Did that give you clarity? Did you become a greater thinker? Did you become more compassionate? Have you grown? As a parent, when you answer that way, are you contributing to the overall well-being of the whole? So those are the, you know, you have to be able to ask yourself questions, and you have to be able to answer questions. You know, again, we're talking about this outside of individual soul lessons. There are people who came to experience dismissive parents. You know, there are parents that, you know, people that came to have unruly kids. I mean, you just pick anything, you know, that we all have those things we sign up for. But on the bigger picture of that, if you can't conceive of choices and answers, you can't conceive of choices in the self. And if you are trying to parent resonant children from rule-based structures, you're going to have a good time, because they're not going to do it. And if they do it, they'll do it from fear. They'll do it from being broken. They'll do it from shame. But you're not putting healthy people into the world. You're not forwarding the evolution of yourself or the people around you or the planet and the human race as a whole. So if you want to affect those things, and that doesn't mean, well, I'm going to just let my kid do whatever they want to do because they said that's what's resonant. There is an inherent need in children for safety. And they get that safety from a sense of stability, a sense of boundaries. So, you know, we don't let them run amok on the edge of the Grand Canyon because the risk assessment is too high. So, you know, it's not free range, whatever. There are parameters. The safety and boundaries and structure that they really need is that you are going to be balanced. And so when you say, like, I want you to clean up your room, the rule here is that you have to clean up your room. And they say, why? I'm just going to get them right back out tomorrow. You need to actually think about why. Why am I having you clean your room? You are really going to get all this back out tomorrow. So why are we doing this? And if you can't come up with an authentic, good reason, something better than because I said so or because this is what we do, then you probably need to change your rule.
Mm-hmm.
Parenting 8 chakra kids these days is a balance of changing the parent and creating enough framework for safety in the child while also enough room for growth and expansion. Mm-hmm. But you got to be willing to grow and expand as an adult. And that's super easy to say and super easy to do until you've worked all day and you're super tired and some big fat bill just came and your kid wants to know why they got to clean their room.
Mm-hmm. So,
you know, sometimes it's also about learning how to say, I want to answer that for you, but mommy is overwhelmed right now, or daddy is overwhelmed right now. And right now I'm going to ask you to clean this room, and we will discuss this later. I will answer your questions later, but right now I don't have the capacity. And then you have to honor that, because if that's what you said to a coworker, if that's what you said to a friend, you'd be expected to honor that. And so you need to honor that where the children are concerned too. Just because they're young doesn't mean that they don't have respect. What are you teaching them? Are you teaching them that they don't matter to come back to, but everybody that you work with is? So, you know, they're little humans. They're not dumb. Does that make sense?
Totally. Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome. So I know we have run over time. I want to thank you guys for tuning in and for dealing with our little technical stuff as we kind of get our feet wet in you know, the first online version of one of these. I am super open to input. If you want to shoot me an email and you have like, hey, I think this would work better, I will certainly intake all of those. Some of it might be doable, some of it not. But I really appreciate you guys hanging out. You brought great questions, and I'm very grateful for that. I do want to remind you a couple of things. Just if you're not on my Facebook, there are some things that are going to be happening on Facebook that are Facebook live stream only. Those have some tendency towards spontaneity and less of a schedule, I think, but there are some good things that happen there, and I do post some things there. So, you know, don't forget to check some of that out. I do have a new YouTube channel that we will be loading all of the live stream videos to once we edit out like 15 minutes of break. And so all of those things will be up on the new YouTube channel, you know, like post-class, it should be like within a week. So this one will be up within the week. The website, julienorth.com, and that's the place where I'm going to, you know, keep evolving the classes and what we're doing. For right now, we're doing a bunch of classes for free. It's a great opportunity for all of us, where there's going to be some empath, you know, not full empath classes because that's a 12-hour class, but little mini pieces, especially some tools that are really helpful for like right now, for all the things that are going on like right now. So we're just going to do some kind of little mini 2-hour classes around that. And there's a tool that is super helpful for kind of divining intuitive stuff that works fabulously well. I'm going to do a little intuitive development class around that too. We'll probably do some more Pick My Brain. So any of that stuff you want to know, make sure you're on the mailing list. You can sign up at julienorth.com. When the YouTube stuff goes up, just make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel, and there's usually a little bell next there. You have to subscribe and then hit the bell, or you won't get notified that new videos are up around those things. Keith, what am I missing?
I think that's kind of it.
Awesome.
I think it went great. Good
Awesome.
first show, right?
Excellent. Thank you guys. You were great question askers. So I appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you in the next class. All right?